Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong? Even when you knew you did, imagine walking up to the gate for your flight, first-class ticket in hand, confident smile on your face only to be told, "Ma'am, you must be in the wrong line." What would you do? Stay quiet to avoid a scene? Or stand your ground and risk losing everything, your peace, your pride, your flight? This is the story of Dr. Naomi Ellis, a successful black CEO who faced that exact moment at Gate A22. 15 minutes later, her decision would stop the entire plane from taking off not out of anger, but out of grace and courage. A simple act that forced an entire system to look in the mirror. If it were you, would you have the strength to speak up? Would you choose calm when the world expected rage? Would you fight not with your voice, but with your dignity? Because sometimes one person's quiet stand can shake a nation louder than any protest. Stay with me because in the next few minutes, you'll see how a woman who was told to sit down ended up helping a whole country stand up. If stories like this move, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so more people can feel what you're about to feel. Now, let's begin. Black CEO kicked out. During boarding, 15 minutes later, she grounds the flight. On Monday morning, JFK Airport resembled a giant beehive. Loudspeakers blared, punctuated by the sound of luggage carts rolling across the floor. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the cold, humid air of industrial air conditioning. Everyone was in a hurry. Everyone had somewhere to go. At Gate A22, a long line of passengers stretched out. Some looked down at their phones. Others sighed at the 15-minute delay. The LED on the announcement board blinked Flight 382 to Atlanta, now boarding first class. Dr. Naomi Ellis stood at the end of the line, a small silver-gray suitcase in one hand and a worn black leather briefcase in the other. She wore a white suit with a turned-down collar and silent high heels. Her hair was pulled back into a bun, and her face was calm, as if she had grown accustomed to the noise around her. She arrived earlier than usual. Today's schedule was tight, an 8 to 15 a.m. flight to Atlanta, an 11 meeting with partners, and an afternoon review of the draft Fair Skies contract with Atlantic Skyways, the third-largest airline in the United States. She had worked as a consultant for many corporations, but this project was particularly special, reforming fairness and diversity policies in airline customer service. Naomi knows the subject is sensitive. She's received her fair share of defensive reactions from senior management and occasional looks of disbelief, but she believes real change begins in the small details, where ordinary people touch each other every day. As the line moved forward, Naomi smiled at the ticket inspector, a young man named Ethan Carter, his face tense, his eyes darting from person to person. He was tired, clearly having been standing since dawn. But when Naomi handed over her e-ticket, her smile was not returned. The scanner beeped green, but Ethan frowned. He looked back at the ticket, then at Naomi. "Ma'am, I need to see your ticket again." Naomi tilted her head, her voice soft. "Of course." She handed the phone back. The scanner scanned again, still green. Ethan let out a small breath, but didn't invite her over. He leaned over his desk and hit a few keys. The screen flickered. The back row began to stir. A blonde woman whispered, "The ticket must be fake." The man behind Naomi glanced over, his eyes filled with pity and curiosity. Naomi kept her small smile. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Ethan replied, his voice trembling slightly. Just verifying." There seems to be a strange match in the system." The answer said nothing, but the way he said it changed the atmosphere. Doubt spread like ink. A few people started raising their phones. She remembered the first time she flew first class many years ago. The flight attendant had asked her 3 times if she was in the wrong gate. She thought she was used to it. But you never really get used to people looking at you and thinking something is wrong just because you're a person of color in an expensive suit. The scanner beeped a 3rd time. Ethan raised his head, pursing his lips. "Ma'am, could you please wait to the right for a moment? I need to check with the supervisor." Naomi nodded slightly. "I understand. I'll stand right here." She stepped aside, leaving an empty space in front of the check-in counter. All eyes turned to her, some pitying, some disdainful, some plain curiosity. The electronic board above flashed, "Now boarding, final call in 10 minutes." Naomi checked her watch. 8:03 a.m. She had 12 minutes before her flight departed. Ethan's voice came through the intercom, urgent. She couldn't hear clearly, only saw him glance at her, then turn away. Next to her, another employee whispered to a colleague. Naomi took a deep breath. An image of her mother flashed through her mind, who had once said, "You can't control how others see you. You can only control how you stand up to them." She stood there, not saying a word, just looking out the window at the runway. The sun was high in the sky, the light reflecting off her glasses, making it impossible to see the expression in her eyes. Ethan put down his phone and stepped away from the counter. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a little louder than usual, "I'm sorry, but you'll need to provide additional verification. Maybe proof of employment or the credit card used to purchase the ticket." The line fell silent. Naomi looked around. No one said anything. A few people raised their cameras. There was a long silence. Then she said slowly, "I understand. You go about your business." Then she stood still, her hands on the strap of her suitcase, her back straight, her eyes on the open door of the plane. The loudspeaker came again, cold and steady. "First-class boarding, Flight 382 to Atlanta." Naomi stood there, silent amid the stares. Naomi Ellis is not the type to get angry easily. She has seen worse than an unprofessional airport employee. But what wears her down is not the insults, but the repetition. The same situations, the same skeptical looks, the same silence from the crowd. It makes one realize that sometimes what we believe to be small things are actually cracks in the system. Naomi looked at her watch again. 8:07 a.m. A little girl ran past, giggling with a teddy bear in her hand. She smiled slightly. The child had no idea that in just a few steps she was about to be checked for something ridiculous. She didn't blame Ethan Carter. He wasn't a bad guy. He just worked within a system that taught people to be suspicious of each other. She remembered the morning before, in her small Brooklyn apartment. On her desk was a half-open report, implicit bias in customer-facing roles. The numbers were stark. 62% of black customers reported being treated differently in high-end customer service. 38% of employees admitted to being suspicious of customers because they didn't look like VIPs. Naomi wrote under the same line, "The problem isn't bad people, it's unchecked habits." She sipped her cold coffee and told herself, "I will change that." Little did she know that, just a few hours later, she would become a living example of her own research. Back at Gate A22, Ethan was still talking to someone on the walkie-talkie. A brunette woman stood behind him, her eyes both shy and defensive. Naomi had seen it many times. Fear of making mistakes makes people choose to be strict, a kind of self-defense in work. But who to be strict with and who to be lax with is where prejudice comes in. She took a deep breath, calming herself. Sometimes silence is the loudest voice, but silence can also be misunderstood. She had to choose the right moment. She remembered her father, who had worked as an aircraft engineer in South Carolina. He often told her that the first time he was sent to a meeting in Washington, they wouldn't let him into the first-class dining room because they thought he was the driver. Her father just smiled and said, "They can keep the table, but they can't keep my dream." When he told the story, he always smiled gently. But Naomi knew that behind that smile was a wound that had never healed. Another employee walked over. He was in his 40s, wearing a name tag that read Robert Hayes. He looked at Naomi cautiously, not with contempt, but as if trying to understand the situation. Naomi said softly, "May I know what the problem is?" Robert replied, "We received a system alert about an unusual ticket. It could be a technical error, or there could be a mistake in the passenger information." Naomi asked, "Are you saying I'm not the owner of this ticket?" Robert didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, then said softly, "I'm just following the procedure, ma'am." The phrase was so familiar it was almost meaningless. Follow the procedure. A gentle but sharp excuse, killing reason with apparent correctness. Naomi nodded, murmuring, "I understand." But something inside her was seething, not with anger, but with sadness and exhaustion. She looked away from them and through the window. On the runway, a Boeing 737 had just landed. Morning sunlight filtered through the thin dust, reflecting off her glasses. In that moment, she thought of her job, the diversity presentations, the endless meetings, the promises of "we'll do better." And now, she was being challenged by the very thing she was trying to change. Behind her, a woman's voice said, "I don't think they should let anyone up if they have any doubts." Another man whispered, "Yes, they should be careful. Who knows?" She heard it all, but didn't turn around. The words were racing through her head. Was it worth it, Naomi? All the work, all the speeches, and this. Then another voice spoke in her head, her mother's voice. "You're not fighting to make them see you're right. You're fighting to make yourself feel good." Naomi smiled slightly. She felt her heartbeat slowing down, steady and steady like the clock on her wrist. She opened her bag, took out a small bottle of water, and took a sip. Amidst the silence of the waiting gate, that small action made the atmosphere a little less tense. A child asked his mother, "Why didn't they let that girl on the plane?" The mother looked down, not knowing how to answer. Naomi heard clearly, turned back, and smiled at the child. She said softly, just enough for the child to hear, "Sometimes people need more time to believe in the right things." The child nodded, not understanding everything, but the innocent look in his eyes made Naomi feel more at ease. The clock read 8:10. 3 minutes to last boarding. Ethan still hadn't returned. Naomi knew that a protest now would make her a troublemaker. She chose to stand still, but, in her mind, she began to sort through the details the way they spoke, the looks, the procedures, the cameras around the counter. She wasn't angry, but she was observing, remembering. Another female employee approached and spoke softly to Robert. Naomi saw them look at her again, then bow their heads and whisper, "No explanation, no apology." when the final call announcement came through the loudspeaker. Naomi knew things had gone beyond a simple misunderstanding. This was the moment when her silence could be evidence or forgotten. She reached for her smartwatch. The screen lit up, and a small icon appeared, recording started. She took a deep breath. Her eyes lit up like tiny lamps. Something stirred inside her, not anger, but readiness. In the distance, the faint hum of an airplane engine echoed through the hall. Naomi looked out at the runway and thought, maybe she wouldn't fly today. But maybe something bigger would start right here. No one said anything more. The air around the gate seemed to thicken. The white light from the ceiling light shone down, reflecting off the polished floor. Naomi stood there, her posture straight, her face strangely calm. She looked at no one, only at her own reflection. A black woman in a white suit, being asked to wait for her first-class ticket to be verified. The situation, though all too familiar, still made her chest tighten. The plane door opened slightly, and the flight attendants were guiding the first passengers onto the plane. The sound of suitcases being dragged mixed with the loudspeaker announcements. Some people still looked at Naomi, curiously, suspiciously, while others pretended not to see. But their silence, sometimes, was heavier than their words. Ethan returned, holding a piece of printed paper. He tried to keep his voice calm, but something in his demeanor suggested that he was still suspicious. "Ma'am, we need to check some more information. Can you show us the credit card you used to buy the ticket?" Naomi asked again, her voice soft. "I bought it through the company, with a corporate card. Here's the reservation code, and here's the confirmation email." She opened her phone and held the screen up to him. He glanced at it, but didn't take it. Behind her, a middle-aged passenger spoke up. "She's already scanned her ticket 3 times. What else do you want?" Ethan didn't reply. Another employee approached and whispered something. Naomi listened vaguely, only catching the 2 words "possible fraud." She smiled faintly, like someone who had just heard something so familiar it was boring. Possible fraud. Those 2 words had haunted her for years, in many places, from bank counters to clothing stores to hotel reception desks. Every time she was doubted, she smiled, was polite, and proved herself competent. But today was different. Today, she was flying to talk about customer service bias. And perhaps the universe was giving her a living proof. A young woman standing nearby pulled out her phone. Naomi saw the lens glint in the light. Another young man began filming, whispering something to his friend. She heard tick-tock and live. They weren't filming in support, nor in disapproval. They were filming out of curiosity, but that curiosity would, inadvertently, turn this moment into something bigger than it all. Naomi remained still. Part of her wanted to speak clearly now. She had every right to do so. But another part of her, quiet and cold, said to wait. Sometimes the best way to reveal the truth is to let others do it themselves. Ethan stepped forward again. "Ma'am, can you tell me what you do?" Naomi blinked, tilting her head slightly. "What do I do?" she repeated slowly. "I'm a strategy consultant. I run a consulting firm for large organizations." Ethan wrote something on a piece of paper, not looking at her. Behind her, the man from earlier spoke even louder. "What are you asking her for?" I've never been asked that before. When flying first class, several people in the line agreed. Another woman raised her phone to record the whole scene. Naomi turned slightly, her eyes grateful to the man, but her tone remained the same. "I understand. You're just doing your job. she said. "But if the protocol requires verifying the occupation of passengers, I expect you to apply it to all of them." Ethan looked up, momentarily confused. He was about to say something, but then stopped. Guilt began to creep into his eyes. His supervisor, a man named Robert Hayes, turned around. His voice was low and hard. "What's going on here?" Ethan answered shortly. "Corporate card verification, sir. I'm just following procedure." Robert looked at Naomi, his eyes half controlling, half defensive. "Ma'am, we just need to make sure everything is legit. There have been a lot of first-class ticket fraud cases lately. I hope you understand." Naomi asked again. "You said a lot of cases. So how many of them are women of color?" Robert fell silent. A few people around him began to whisper. Naomi said nothing more. She opened her bag, took out her wallet, and pulled out a business card. She handed it to Robert, saying simply, "This is the name of my company, Ellis Strategic Consulting." Robert read it, frowning. Consulting, for whom Naomi replied, for airline corporations, including Atlantic Skyways. The atmosphere fell for a few seconds. A young woman in the back row whispered, "Oh my God, she's the CEO of that consulting company." The whispers spread quickly. Robert, though not completely convinced, began to feel uneasy. He picked up the intercom and called the management floor. Naomi heard his low, urgent voice. "I need to urgently verify the identity of passenger Naomi Ellis, who appears to be a consultant. But the ticket is shown under corporate card." While Robert spoke, Naomi turned to the window. The plane had finished its check. The boarding door was still open, but time was ticking away. 12 minutes. She looked at her watch. 8:15. She whispered, as if to herself, "If this is a test, I will not fail." Suddenly, a ping came from a passenger's phone. The person lowered his voice. "Hey, the video's going viral. Almost 300 people are watching it." Naomi listened, not reacting. But deep down, she knew this is the age of proof. Everything can be forgotten unless it is recorded. And today, the world is recording this, frame by frame. Ethan approached, his face losing some of its hardness. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry, but the supervisor asked you to wait a little longer. We're checking with the central system." Naomi asked, "May I know how long it will take?" He avoided her gaze and whispered, "Maybe a few minutes." Naomi smiled and nodded. "I understand. I'll wait." She sat down on the chair near the door, put her suitcase beside her, opened her bag, took out her water bottle and phone. She opened the notes section and typed 8:17. Boarding delayed due to personal verification request. Reason unspecified. Then she put the phone down, still looking at the runway. Little did she know, at that moment, the first video had been shared online, a scene of her standing at the counter, keeping calm while the staff handled things, attracted hundreds of comments. She was so calm. This is a perfect example of unconscious discrimination. Need more information, but I feel uncomfortable watching this scene. Every frame, every glance was creating a story Naomi had never known. A story that was about to go beyond the scope of a single flight. The loudspeaker sounded again, final boarding call. Flight 382 to Atlanta. Naomi heard it, but didn't move. In that moment, she knew the flight might be late, but justice never was. Gate A22 was no longer just a place to wait for a plane. It had become a silent stage where every glance carried judgment. Naomi still sat there, silent as before, but her silence now commanded attention, because in a noisy world, the silent person is sometimes the one who makes everything stop. A phone rang, not hers, but the man standing near the check-in counter. He held it up. The camera pointed at Naomi, his voice hushed but clear. "I'm at JFK. Something strange is going on. A woman is being held back even though her ticket has been scanned." He pressed the live button. The small screen showed 24 people watching. Then the number jumped to 4879-112. The first comment appeared, "What did she do wrong? Then is this racist?" Naomi saw the light from the screen reflected on his face. She knew he was live streaming, but she didn't stop him. She just said quietly, "Make sure the truth is told." He nodded, saying nothing more. His name was Chris Dalton, a young passenger on his way to Dallas. He had only intended to film a few minutes for fun, but he was already feeling uncomfortable with the way things were going. On the other side, Ethan Carter was still waiting for a response from his manager. The pressure made his forehead bead with sweat. The female colleague next to him asked softly, "Should we let her go?" She was polite and didn't do anything. Ethan replied, "Mr. Hayes told me to wait. I don't want to lose my job because of a wrong decision." That sentence, incidentally, was loud enough for a few people around to hear. The people filming started to comment quietly. They only keep her because they're afraid of responsibility. Naomi put her hand on the suitcase, not shaking. She had been through meetings more tense than this, but this time it was not doubt that hurt her, but indifference. She saw in people's eyes the fear of doing wrong, fear of being criticized, fear of losing their jobs, fear of being seen as biased, and it was this fear that fueled injustice. A Latina woman named Maya Lopez stood near the window, opened Instagram, and began filming the scene. Her voice was clear, a little angry. "Hey guys, I'm at JFK. They wouldn't let a black woman board the plane even though she had a valid ticket. I saw it with my own eyes. She was polite. They weren't. Within minutes, the story had spread beyond the gate. Her video was shared, and friends commented, tagging the airline. This isn't the first time." One person wrote, "I've seen this happen at LAX." Naomi realized what was happening. She heard the announcement that the flight was 10 minutes late. Part of her felt tired, but another part felt strangely calm. If the truth must be seen, she told herself, let it be seen in its entirety. Ethan approached again, his voice low. "Ma'am, the manager's coming. Please wait a few more minutes." Naomi looked at him and asked, "Do you believe I did anything wrong?" Ethan was confused and shook his head. "No, but I'm not allowed." Naomi interrupted him, softly. "I understand, but sometimes the right thing starts with the right person." Ethan was silent. Meanwhile, Chris's video had reached over 500 views. A few smaller news outlets started resharing. The hashtag #DachBoardingWhileBlack appeared in the comments. Maya saw it and added her own caption. In less than 10 minutes, Gate A22 was the center of attention on social media. Naomi remained where she was. She had no idea she was becoming a temporary symbol of a larger problem. She only knew that if she lost her composure, everything she stood for would crumble in seconds. She remembered what her father had said when you're in the eye of a storm. The only thing you need to keep is direction. Robert Hayes appeared, carrying an iPad and some papers. Without looking at Naomi, he asked Ethan. "How's it going?" Ethan replied. The ticket is valid, but the system reports a corporate card error. The transaction seems suspicious. Robert nodded, glancing at Naomi. We'll need your cooperation. This is standard procedure. Naomi stood up, straightening her coat. I'm always willing to cooperate, but I also want to make sure this standard procedure applies to all passengers. Can you tell me if you checked the work of the man who boarded before me? Robert was silent. He had no answer. The sound of cell phone cameras snapping away. This is going to be on the news, a passenger whispered. Naomi didn't want to be on the news, but she understood that sometimes you don't choose the story. The story chooses you. She sat back, her eyes fixed on the gate. In her mind, she counted the seconds. She thought about the upcoming meeting in Atlanta, about unfinished projects, and about her mother, who had taught her that patience was not weakness, but controlled strength. Another child appeared, pulling on her mother's hand. Mom, why isn't that girl on the plane yet? The mother was silent, not answering. Naomi bowed her head, smiling slightly at the child. The smile, though small, made the atmosphere lighter. The automatic door opened. A woman in a high-class uniform stepped forward, Linda Parker, the area supervisor. Her face was tense, her eyes assessing the situation. What's going on here? Robert explained quickly, trying to hide his confusion. Linda listened, then turned to Naomi. Ma'am, I'm the area manager. I heard you had a problem with your credit card. Naomi replied softly. No, I have a problem with trust. Linda paused. The people around her turned. The answer was short, but resounding. Linda tried to regain her composure. I just want to make sure the safety procedures are done right. Naomi replied, then do it right for everyone. Silence fell. She looked straight into Linda's eyes, not challenging, not weak, just the look of someone who was used to being challenged. In the distance, Chris whispered into the phone, guys. She's so calm. She's teaching them a lesson without having to say a word. Comments poured in. Gives me goosebumps. So strong. This is how to fight. Linda looked around, noticing dozens of cameras rolling. She knew her actions now were more than just dealing with a passenger. They were dealing with a situation that could become a media crisis. She turned to Ethan and said in a low voice, I'll reconsider. Stay where you are. Naomi stood up and slowly gathered her bag. She said, her voice low but clear, I have a meeting at 11 a.m. in Atlanta. I will wait for another 5 minutes. Then, if necessary, I will call the Atlantic Skyways Partnership representative directly. Linda was stunned for a moment. Robert asked quickly. The partnership representative, Naomi, answered briefly. Yes, because I am their strategic advisor. No one said anything. Maya put the phone down and let out a sigh. Chris paused the live stream for a moment. Something in the air had changed, as if everyone knew they were about to witness something bigger than a small argument. The loudspeaker said, Attention! Gate A22, please. Finalize boarding. 10 minutes delay. Naomi looked at her watch. 8:25. She knew this was just the beginning. The air at Gate A22 was so thick you could hear your own heartbeat. The people filming lowered their cameras. Some leaned in to whisper, others pretended to be busy with their phones. But no one actually left. Everyone was absorbed in the moment, as if they were about to witness something memorable. Naomi remained seated, her hands clasped together, no anger, no complaint. Her silence had a power that loud words could never have. Linda Parker left the counter. talking to someone on the walkie-talkie. The way she spoke made it clear that this was beyond her control. Ethan stood back, his face a mixture of confusion and regret. He looked at Naomi, wanting to say something, but not having the courage. In her eyes, Naomi read the confusion of a generation of employees knowing it was wrong but not knowing what else to do. Robert Hayes remained at the counter, trying to keep his composure. He was busy reviewing the data, as if searching for a reason to justify himself. Naomi watched everything, not missing a single detail. She knew the airline industry's processes. She had consulted for them. She understood that every decision, no matter how small, could be justified by the word process. And when process became a shield, the person behind it gradually disappeared. A group of passengers in the opposite row began to murmur, "I can't believe they did that. She looks too decent. I would have screamed." The murmurs were low, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Naomi remained silent, her eyes fixed on the window. Outside, the New York sky had turned to silvery gray, the morning sun obscured by clouds. The sound of another plane's engine echoed, low and distant. Naomi's mind raced with memories of discrimination she'd experienced. The time a store security guard followed her while she was just picking out a gift for her mother. The time the hotel staff turned her down because they thought there was a mistake. And the time she'd given a presentation to a panel of white men who looked at each other as she walked in as if they couldn't believe she was the keynote speaker. Each time, she'd kept her composure, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. She let out a breath, trying to calm herself. Today was more than just a delayed flight, she told herself. This was a test of her own resolve. If she let her emotions take over, all her efforts at respect and dignity would be ruined. A ding sounded from Chris Dalton's phone. He looked down, eyes wide. "Oh my God," he said quietly. "The video has over 50,000 views." Maya Lopez stood nearby, checking her phone as well. "Stand with Naomi is trending." Naomi heard it, but didn't react. She just smiled, a smile more sad than happy. The internet is faster than justice, she thought. Linda turned back, her face looking more serious than before. "Ma'am," she said, "we are waiting for a response from the center management. I understand you're in a hurry, but please understand," Naomi replied softly. "I am still understanding, but understanding has its limits." Her voice was not high, not harsh, but enough for the person opposite to feel the weight behind it. Robert interrupted. "You need to understand that this is not a personal problem." Naomi turned to look at him, her eyes calm but sharp as knives. "Every action starts with the individual. Then it becomes a problem of the system. If no one takes personal responsibility, the system will never change." That sentence made Robert silent. The air was quiet. Only the loudspeaker announced another flight departing from the next gate. Maya turned her phone back to Naomi, her voice trembling with emotion. She didn't have to scream. She didn't have to argue. She just had to be there, and people had to ask questions. Viewers started commenting, "I'm crying. This isn't just about a plane ticket. She's teaching us a lesson about patience and self-respect." Naomi stood up. She took a few slow steps toward the counter, her voice calm. "I want to be clear. I don't want anyone to lose their job. I just want people to understand that sometimes the worst thing is not hate, but silence." Ethan looked at her, his eyes changing. He swallowed and said softly, "I'm sorry, ma'am." Naomi smiled. "Not blaming. Thank you. Apologizing is a start." Linda stepped forward and whispered to Robert. Naomi couldn't hear clearly, but she saw the worry in their eyes. Clearly, the news had reached someone more important. She turned to Naomi. "We're doing our best." Naomi replied, "I don't doubt that, but I hope our best isn't just for today." Ethan bowed his head, avoiding her gaze. Something inside him began to stir, a mixture of shame and awakening. He realized, perhaps for the first time, he understood what bias was, not intentionally doing wrong, but not having the courage to do right. Outside, the wind blew harder. A piece of paper flew from someone's hand, brushed past Naomi's feet, and stopped next to her suitcase. She bent down to pick it up. It was another passenger's luggage tag. A small detail, but it made her smile. Because sometimes, the things people drop help others remember they are still here, still present. She looked out at the tarmac. The Boeing 737 was still, its lights glinting off its metal. She thought of the speech she might not make in Atlanta. What would she tell them if she was late, that she had just been held up for the very thing she was supposed to be giving? The thought made her laugh, a smile that was both bitter and proud. Maya turned back, her voice soft but firm. "You know, there are hundreds of people watching and praying for you to get on that flight." Naomi replied, "I thank them, but I don't need to get on. I just need them to remember why I was held back." There was a long silence. Then Chris spoke, as if speaking for everyone. "Maybe it wasn't you who needed to get on the plane today. It was the world who needed you to stay." Naomi looked at him, nodded, her eyes shining with something both tender and determined. "Maybe so," she said. The loudspeaker sounded again. "Flight 382 to Atlanta will experience an additional delay due to operational reasons." The cameramen let out a collective sigh. Naomi closed her eyes, her heart strangely at peace. She didn't know what was coming, but this feeling made her understand the quietest battle is sometimes the strongest. She opened her eyes and took a deep breath. Her eyes were brighter in the dim light, a woman who chose to remain silent, but the world was beginning to listen. The waiting room was still noisy, but no one in the waiting room paid any attention to the other flights. All eyes were on Naomi Ellis. She sat still as a statue, occasionally taking a deep breath and exhaling slowly. Her movements were strangely calm, as if time was moving around her and she was standing outside of it. Online, Chris Dalton's live video had surpassed 100,000 views. Comments kept popping up, the voices of strangers echoing through the screen. "Is this America 2215? Why is this still happening? Share so they can be held accountable." At the boarding counter, Robert Hayes's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw the words "Head Office, Atlantic Skyways" appear. The sweat on his forehead immediately poured more heavily. He looked at Linda Parker, the area manager, with a pleading look. Linda nodded slightly. "Answer," she said, "but be careful with your words." Robert picked up the phone, his voice trembling slightly. "Yes, this is Hayes, Gate Supervisor A22. A man's voice came from the other end, cold and hard. "We are monitoring the situation online. Is it true that the detained passenger is named Naomi Ellis?" Robert swallowed. "Yes, sir. There was a problem with the credit card verification." The other end of the line interrupted, his voice becoming sharper. "Do you know who she is?" Robert paused. I haven't confirmed." "Sir, then let me confirm for you," the other person continued. "She is Dr. Naomi Ellis, Atlantic Skyways strategic consultant, who is helping us restructure our entire equity and diversity training program. She is our partner, not a suspect." Robert stood still. Linda Parker glanced at him, her face changing color. She asked softly, "What did they say?" Robert lowered the phone, his voice choking. "They said she is a partner." The air froze for a few seconds. Ethan Carter stood behind her, eyes wide. "A partner of the firm," he repeated. "You mean?" Robert didn't answer. Linda took a step forward, her voice low but urgent. "Call me back as soon as you have further instructions." Then she turned to Naomi, a forced smile on her normally serious face. "Ma'am, it seems there's a big misunderstanding. We're working it out." Naomi looked at her, her eyes calm, not accusing. "I know," she said. "I told you from the beginning. I'm the consultant for Atlantic Skyways." Linda nodded slightly, trying to keep her composure. "We're really sorry. It's just that the process Naomi interrupted, I understand the process. I wrote part of it." The sound silenced everyone around. Her words were soft and sharp, like a knife wrapped in velvet. Ethan bowed his head. He felt like someone had just looked at himself in the mirror. He saw a man who only knew how to obey orders, afraid to stand up for what was right. Linda turned and signaled Robert. "Call the central office. I want official confirmation that her ticket is valid and that she is allowed to board immediately." Robert hurried to do so, but Naomi raised her hand. "No need," she said. "This flight can depart without me." Linda was stunned. "What do you mean? You have a meeting in Atlanta?" "Right." Naomi stood up, her voice low and calm. "That meeting can be rescheduled, but this conversation between you and me needs to happen right here." A few people in the crowd clapped softly, not loudly, just briefly, but enough to spread like a small wave. "She really does this," Maya Lopez whispered. Chris continued filming, his voice trembling with emotion. "She doesn't need a stage. She makes the world her stage." Linda tried to regain her composure and said softly, "Ma'am, I understand you're angry, but we'll handle it internally." Naomi looked at her and said softly, "This isn't an internal matter. This is a question of the culture of an entire organization." Her voice was even, each word falling on the tile floor. When someone is treated differently just because they don't look like a typical first-class passenger, it's not a personal fault. It's a structural fault. Robert listened to those words, bowed his head, his hands gripping the paper so tightly that it wrinkled. Ethan looked down at his shoes, quietly breathing. They both knew that an apology was no longer enough. Linda lowered her voice, for the first time with a hint of sincerity. "Miss Ellis, I'm sorry. I can't change what happened, but I can make sure it's taken care of." Naomi looked at her, smiling slightly. "Thank you. But don't just take care of it. Take action. Outside the window." The first drops of rain began to fall on the runway. The sound of the rain was light, like a background beat for this moment. Naomi stood still, her eyes looking out the window. Chris's voice softly coming through the phone. "Everyone. She's not yelling, not demanding, just telling the truth. And they're listening." Linda took another call, this time from the regional vice president himself. She listened for a few seconds, then quickly said, "Yes, I understand. I'll take care of it." When she hung up, she turned to Naomi and said in a low voice, "They want me to inform you that the flight will be delayed for 15 minutes. They said you have a choice. Either get on the flight or stop and talk to us." Naomi was silent for a moment. Then she asked, "Who made that decision?" Linda replied. "The vice president of the Eastern region." Naomi chuckled. "Interesting. Call him. I want to talk." Everyone around seemed to hold their breath. Linda was confused for a moment, but then complied. The call connected. The speakerphone turned low. A middle-aged man's voice rang out, "This is Mark Evans. I want to extend my deepest apologies to you, Dr. Ellis. We take full responsibility for this mistake." Naomi replied, her voice soft but firm, "I don't need an apology, Mr. Evans. I need a guarantee that no one else will have to go through this again." There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. Then he said, "You have my word. I will order a complete overhaul of the customer service training program, and I want you to oversee it." Naomi smiled, her eyes softening. "If you're serious, I'll be there. But remember, the change doesn't start with the training. It starts right now at Gate A22. Linda breathed a sigh of relief. Robert bowed his head. Ethan said softly, "Thank you." Naomi turned around, put her hands on the counter, and said in a small but clear voice, "Don't thank me. Remember this next time you're in front of someone the system tells you to be suspicious of." Maya stopped recording, tears streaming down her face. Chris put the phone down, no longer streaming. They didn't need it anymore. The story had taken on a life of its own. Naomi looked at her watch. 8:50. She picked up her suitcase and straightened her coat. Linda asked, "Do you want us to take you to the plane?" Naomi shook her head. "No, I'll go by myself, like all the other passengers." As she walked through the boarding gate, no one spoke. Some bowed slightly, others stood still, and when she disappeared around the corner leading to the stairs, the entire waiting room exhaled in unison. Linda looked at Robert, her voice tired. "Send the report right away. And remember one more item lessons from Gate A22. Robert nodded, his eyes still red. Ethan sat down, looked at his hands, and said softly, "Maybe today I learned the most important thing in my life." On the tarmac, the rain had intensified. The plane was about to take off, and somewhere in first class. Naomi Ellis sat by the window watching the rain, her hand resting lightly on a notebook. She wrote a short note. "Sometimes, to fly high, you have to stop and fix your wings." The plane doors closed, and passengers began to settle into their seats, the clinking of luggage, the sound of seat belts being buckled, and whispers mixed with the sound of the engine starting up. Naomi Ellis sat by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked runway. The light reflecting off the glass cast her face in half light and half shadow. She said nothing, just placed the small notebook on her lap and wrote a few short lines in neat handwriting. The last line she wrote, "No one should be humiliated to be respected." The head stewardess, a brunette named Rachel Myers, stepped forward to greet her. "Miss Ellis, I'm sorry about what happened at the gate. We want to apologize." Naomi looked up, smiling slightly. "No need to apologize to me personally. Just make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else next time." Rachel nodded, but her eyes still held confusion. "I understand, ma'am." "Do you need water or something?" Naomi replied. "A cup of warm water. Thank you." As Rachel left, Naomi leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. She heard the whispers around her, some well wishes, some admiration. One passenger whispered, "That's her. The one in the video? Another replied, I can't believe she's so calm. Naomi heard it all, but she didn't pay attention. She didn't want to be a story. She just wanted this story to be a lesson. The plane began to taxi. Outside, the rain was heavier, streaks of water sliding down the windshield. Naomi opened her phone and saw hundreds of texts and emails from colleagues, reporters, even partners from other states. The notification on the screen read, Stand with Naomi, trending number 2 in the U.S. She let out a small, long breath. The world moved faster than she thought. As the plane was about to exit the main runway, Rachel turned around, her face tense. Miss Ellis, Control wants to talk to you, on the crew satellite phone. Naomi looked at her, a little surprised. Right now, Rachel nodded. They said it was urgent. Naomi unbuckled her seatbelt, stepped out into the aisle, and followed Rachel toward the front service area. In the small cabin, a black satellite phone lay on the table. Rachel pressed the button and handed it to her. A deep male voice rang out, Dr. Ellis, this is Mark Evans. We spoke just now. Naomi replied, I remember. He continued, I have received reports and reactions from the media. The airline management asked me to work directly with you. It is possible that we will suspend the flight for further investigation. Naomi frowned slightly. Suspend, Mark explained. It is not your fault, but there's too much media pressure. They are afraid that letting the flight take off may be seen as ignoring the incident. Naomi was silent for a few seconds. Then she said, her voice calm but firm, I don't need this flight stopped because of me. But if you really want to change things, let me speak to the entire passenger line. Mark hesitated on the other end of the line. You mean, speak on the plane? Naomi smiled. Yes. Sometimes lessons need to be shared right where they come from. A minute later, Rachel received instructions. She was confused, but she obeyed. She turned on the cabin microphone. Attention, everyone. We have a special announcement from our airline representative and guest of honor on board today. Dr. Naomi Ellis. The commotion died down. Naomi walked to the center of the cabin and looked down the aisle. Eyes were on her, curious, appreciative, surprised. Her voice was soft, deep, and clear. Good morning. I know you're busy, and maybe someone saw the short video from Gate A22. I'm not here to retell it. I just want to say this. We're all human, and sometimes the system makes us forget that. A few passengers nodded. She continued. No one is born knowing how to be fair. We learn it from how others treat us. And sometimes, the lesson comes in the most unexpected moments, like this morning. A soft murmur spread through the cabin. Naomi looked around, her eyes lingering on each face. I don't want anyone to lose their job. I just want each of us, when we see someone being treated unfairly, to not be silent, because silence, even if well-intentioned, is complicity. Someone clapped softly, then more. The applause coalesced into a warm sound, echoing through the rain outside the windows. Rachel stood at the back of the cabin, her hands on her chest. Her eyes were moist. Ethan, at the door, listening on the walkie-talkie, bowed his head deeply. Robert Hayes, watching the internal broadcast from the airport office, was speechless. Linda Parker sat in the control room, sighing, her eyes following Naomi on the screen. Naomi said the last sentence slowly, emphasizing each word, we can fly higher if we learn to see each other as real people. Then she smiled, bowed slightly, and returned to her chair. The applause lasted a full minute. The captain announced over the loudspeaker, "We will be pausing takeoff for a few minutes at the airline's request. Thank you, passengers." Naomi looked out the window and saw the ground crew conversing below. A technical vehicle stopped near the nose of the plane. She had no idea what was going on, but she sensed that, for the first time, not just the flight, but the entire system was stopping to think. 15 minutes passed. The news spread quickly. CNN ran its first story, "Black CEOs, Calm Response Grounds, Flight for Reflection." The hashtag, #Ground for Change, started trending alongside "Stand with Naomi." Mark Evans called back, his voice softer. "Dr. Ellis, we've decided to call our new training program Gate A22. Thanks for making us reconsider." Naomi smiled and said softly, "It's a good name, but don't let it be just a symbol." When the plane finally took off, the sky cleared, the gray clouds parted, and sunlight filtered through the small window. Naomi closed her eyes and leaned her head back in the seat. She didn't know what she had just created, but inside she felt a rare sense of peace. Behind them, the passengers were still talking. One said, "That's strange. I never thought such a small thing would make me think so much." The person next to him replied, "Sometimes, to take off, someone needs to bring the whole plane to a halt." Naomi heard, and for the first time that day, she laughed heartily. The plane rose, breaking through the clouds. Below, New York City grew smaller. Naomi looked down, where Gate A22 was now a blur in her memory, but she knew that from today on, it would become a symbol, not of humiliation, but of awakening. The plane landed in Atlanta around noon. Sunlight slanted through the windows, bathing the first-class cabin in a golden hue. Naomi Ellis opened her eyes to the sound of the tires hitting the runway, a short, metallic sound that marked the end of the first chapter of a long day. Passengers began to gather their belongings, the click of seat belts, but unlike any other flight, this cabin was quieter. No one rushed to stand. They just looked at each other, as if they all knew they had just witnessed something special. Naomi sat still for a moment, letting the crowd pass. As she stood, Rachel Myers walked over and gently touched her shoulder. "Thank you for what you said. I've worked here for 12 years and I've never seen a moment of silence like this." Naomi smiled, her voice warm. "Thank you, Rachel. Sometimes silence is the beginning of true listening." Rachel nodded, her eyes a little moved. Naomi stepped off the plane. The Atlanta air was thick with heat and engine noise. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway, her heels mingling with the sound of suitcase wheels rolling across the floor. When she reached the arrivals area, she noticed a group of people waiting. 2 were her assistants. The rest were reporters and airport staff. One of them had a camera, raising the microphone. "Dr. Ellis, can we ask a few questions about the incident at JFK this morning?" Naomi paused, her eyes calm. "If you just want a sensational story, I have nothing to say. But if you want to talk about real change, I am willing." The group was silent for a few seconds. A young female reporter stepped forward, her voice trembling but sincere. "Can you tell me how you felt when the flight was stopped because of you?" Naomi looked at her and replied softly, "I didn't stop it. I just made it think. Sometimes, a minute of thinking is more valuable than an hour of flying." The answer silenced the group. The camera continued to record, but there was no more shouting. Naomi's assistant, a man named Daniel Price, handed her a bottle of water and a file. "Headquarters has prepared a conference room. Everyone is waiting for you." Naomi nodded, walking away and asking, "Do they know everything?" Daniel replied. "The entire executive board has seen the video. They have also issued a public apology." Naomi let out a small sigh. "Good, but apologizing is the first step, not the end." They walked down the corridor leading to the office area. Airport employees passing by looked at her, some smiling, some nodding. She returned each look, neither arrogant nor cold, just gently, as if she understood the importance of each gesture. When Naomi arrived at Atlantic Skyway's headquarters in downtown Atlanta, she was ushered straight into the main conference room. 3 people were waiting: Mark Evans, the regional vice president, and 2 other senior executives, Patricia Moore and Anthony Reed. The atmosphere was formal, the lighting cold, the wooden table gleaming. Mark stood up first. "Dr. Ellis, thank you for coming. I can't thank you enough." Naomi put down her bag and sat across from him. "I didn't come here to hear apologies. Mark, I came here to talk about opportunity." She opened her briefcase and took out a carefully marked plan. "This morning's incident shows that your problem is not a few errant employees. It's a structural one, a mindset. And if you don't address it, the next incident will have bigger consequences." Patricia Moore interrupted sharply. "You think a training session will change the system?" Naomi replied firmly. "No, but the right training, starting with the truth, can change perception, and perception changes behavior." Anthony Reed nodded slowly. "Do you have a specific proposal?" Naomi nodded. "The program is called Gate A22. It will teach employees not just how to handle customers, but how to see the person behind the ticket, behind the skin color, behind the status. I want each person to understand that the moment they scan their ticket, they represent the entire brand." Mark leaned back in his chair, looking at Naomi with newfound respect. "Did you know that this morning's video got over 2 million views in 3 hours?" Naomi chuckled. "So use it. Don't let it be a blemish. Make it a starting point." Patricia looked at her, her eyes calculating. "If we approve, will you personally supervise?" Naomi replied. "I will lead the first phase, but I want every senior leader to attend the first session, not just send employees to learn. Otherwise, this will just be a formal exercise." Mark nodded vigorously. "Agreed. I will be there." The atmosphere in the room changed. The initial tension was replaced by focus. Naomi opened a slide and presented the stages: assess the situation, train, verify the results. Her voice was steady and steady, with occasional natural pauses as if telling a story. She didn't lecture, didn't criticize, just gave real examples. A well-timed smile from an employee can save a brand. A suspicious look can drive a customer away forever. When she finished, the room was silent for a few seconds. Mark said softly, "Dr. Ellis, this morning you stopped a flight. Now you've made us look at ourselves." Naomi smiled. "Good, because that's what I wanted." The meeting ended. Naomi stepped out onto the balcony, the Atlanta breeze blowing gently, carrying the damp scent of morning rain. Below, employees were getting off work, some stopping to look at her, pointing, whispering. Daniel came over and whispered, "You know, they just put up a temporary banner in the HR area, Gate A22, change takes off here." Naomi looked down, her eyes flashing with emotion but still looking calm. "Okay," she said. "Let's start here." In the afternoon, when Naomi left the building, the sunlight was soft. She walked slowly to the parking lot and her phone rang again. It was a message from Rachel Myers. "Thank you. I told the whole crew about this morning. They all said they wanted to take your course." Naomi read it, smiled slightly. She texted back, "I'll be happy to see you again. Not at the gate this time." On the way back to the hotel, the car passed through the downtown area. A large electronic billboard displayed the news, "Atlantic Skyways launches diversity reform program after viral video." Naomi looked at it through the window, feeling both relieved and heavy. It was just the beginning. She leaned her head back on the seat, her eyes on the sky outside, where small planes were flying through the thin layer of clouds. Her voice was low, loud enough for only herself to hear. Change doesn't come when you shout louder than others, but when you make them listen with the truth. The car continued rolling into the sunset. The long day was drawing to a close, but Naomi's journey had just begun. The next morning, when Naomi Ellis woke up in her downtown Atlanta hotel room, morning light filtered through the white curtains, softly illuminating the floor. She sat up and reached for her phone. Notifications filled the screen, more than 200 unread emails, hundreds of text messages, and countless social media notifications. She took a deep breath and slowly opened an article from the New York Times. The headline read, "Dr. Naomi Ellis, the woman who grounded a flight and lifted a nation." She read each line. Her eyes calm, but her heart could not help but feel heavy. The article recounted the events of yesterday morning in a tone full of admiration. The writer described her as a symbol of calm and intelligence in an age of too much noise. But Naomi knew well that the media could lift someone up only to drag them down tomorrow. She did not want to be a symbol. She just wanted the real conversation to begin. While she was making coffee, the phone rang. It was Mark Evans. "Good morning. Naomi, have you seen the news? I just read it," she replied. "The storm has started." Mark chuckled. "A storm, but a good one. More than 20 TV stations are contacting you to interview you. CNN, NBC, even the BBC." Naomi was silent for a few seconds before saying, "I won't do sensational interviews. If they want to talk about change, I'm okay with it. If they just want an emotional story." "I'm out," Mark replied. "I understand. I'll filter it for you." She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. The video of her speech on the plane had been viewed more than 10 million times. The comments section was endless, with tens of thousands of people sharing their own experiences. "I was treated like that at the Chicago airport. I never thought skin color could determine how people see you until I saw this video." Someone wrote, "She didn't just stop the flight, she made us stop and look at ourselves." Naomi read each line, unable to contain her emotions. At noon, Daniel Price came into the room. He had his laptop with him and opened a media dashboard. We're in the middle of it. The hashtag Gate A22 has surpassed 20 million mentions. Politicians, artists, athletes are resharing the video. This story has gone beyond the airline. Naomi looked at the screen, sipping her coffee, and that's the problem. When the story gets too big, people forget the real people in it. Daniel was silent. He knew Naomi wasn't speaking to be modest, but because she understood how the media worked. In the afternoon, she accepted an exclusive interview with CNN. The reporter was a middle-aged woman named Caroline Brooks, known for her straightforward questioning. The studio was set up right in the hotel lobby. When the lights came on, Caroline looked at Naomi and smiled. "Dr. Ellis, you know, Many people call you the woman who stopped the country." Naomi chuckled. "If that's true, then I hope they stop not to look at me, but to look at themselves." Caroline nodded, her voice slow. "What makes you stay calm when being treated so unfairly?" Naomi replied, "I have learned that anger can win you in the moment, but only calmness can win you in the long run. I don't want to shout to be heard. I want to speak to be understood." That answer made the whole crew silent for a few seconds. When the interview ended, Caroline stepped forward to shake his hand. "Thank you. I've interviewed hundreds of people, but few have made me think as much as you." Naomi replied softly, "If you're thinking, then I did the right thing." After the interview, she left the hotel. A group of black students were standing across the street. When they saw her, they shouted, "Dr. Ellis, thank you." She walked over, smiled, and talked with them for a few minutes. A young woman asked, "Are you scared?" Facing the system, Naomi looked at her, her eyes gentle but firm. "Scared, but I'm more afraid of silence than of speaking up." That evening, when she returned to her room, the phone rang again. This time it was Linda Parker. Her voice was deep and sincere. "Dr. Ellis, I just want to say thank you. My entire staff met today. Many cried while watching the video. One young staff member said he felt seen for the first time in his life." Naomi listened, smiling slightly. "Thank you, Linda. I hope things are different at JFK," Linda replied. "I guarantee it." Naomi sat by the window, looking out at the bright city of Atlanta. She opened her notebook and wrote a few lines. "Some storms don't destroy, they purify." She knew there would be more calls, more meetings, more invitations tomorrow, but right now, she just wanted to silently watch the sleeping city, grateful that she had remained calm in the midst of the storm. The next morning, she was invited to her old university, where students were holding a social justice talk. When she walked into the auditorium, applause broke out. A banner hung high, "Welcome home, Dr. Ellis, the voice of dignity." Naomi stepped onto the stage and bowed. She didn't bring a speech, just spoke with emotion. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who's tired of explaining my humanity, and I think it's time for the world to hear it in our own voices." The room fell silent, then erupted into a long applause. A white male student stood up, his voice filled with emotion. "I never understood what privilege was until I saw your video." "I'm sorry." Naomi nodded and replied softly, "Thank you. Sorry doesn't change the past, but it opens the door to the future." As she stepped off the stage, Daniel whispered to her, "You know, they chose you to be the face of the national campaign for equality in public service." Naomi shook her head slightly, half smiling, half sighing. "I don't want to be the face, I just want to be the bridge." Daniel looked at her, his eyes full of respect. That night, Naomi walked alone through Atlanta's Centennial Park. The night air was cool, the scent of trees mixed with the sounds of the distant city. She looked up at the sky, where the lights of planes slowly passed by. She remembered every moment, from the sound of the ticket scanner at Gate A22 to the moment she stood in the middle of the plane cabin. It all felt like a dream, but so real. She stopped, took out her phone, and played the video again. The image of her standing in the middle of the cabin, saying, "We can fly higher if we look at each other as real people." She heard her own voice again, deep and calm. Tears fell softly, not because of sadness, but because she knew what she did had touched many hearts. Across the street, A 10-year-old black boy recognized her and ran up, smiling brightly. "You're the one in the video." "Right. My mom says you're the bravest person in the world." Naomi bent down, smiled, and patted the boy's head. "Thank you. But remember, being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. Being brave is going forward when you're afraid." The boy nodded, his eyes shining. Naomi watched him run away, relieved. The media storm has not passed, but in Naomi's heart, the wind has calmed. She knows that sometimes change begins not on the big stage, but from small moments like a child's smile, and she also knows that her journey is long, but the direction is clear. 2 weeks after the media storm, the air has calmed. But the impact of the Gate A22 story is still felt across the United States. In major airports, people have started to put up small posters with the words, "Respect takes off here." In universities, students mention Naomi Ellis in discussions about social justice. She's no longer just a name, but a symbol of calm in the face of injustice, of strength in timely silence. Naomi still works as usual. Every morning, she arrives at Atlantic Skyway's Atlanta office, where her team is rolling out the Gate A22 program. During training sessions, she tells less about herself and more about other stories about passengers who are suspected at first glance, about employees who feel invisible pressure from process, about how a timely apology can save a bad day. She turns personal lessons into collective lessons, trauma into direction. One Monday morning, Mark Evans walked into the conference room, looking relieved. "Naomi, this week's report was amazing. After implementing the program in the first 3 airports, customer satisfaction increased by 20%. When asked about their experience, many said they felt the human touch in the service." Naomi smiled, but didn't seem surprised. "I guess it's no wonder that kindness is so well received." Mark laughed. "You're right. But what I didn't expect was that internal staff changed too. They said the program made them feel more proud of their work." Naomi replied, "Because when they understand that they are being listened to, they start listening to others too." That afternoon, Naomi received an invitation from the White House. She was invited to attend a special conference on equality in public spaces. She looked at the white envelope, her heart beating slowly, not because of the fame, but because she knew this responsibility was heavier than ever. She called Daniel and asked him to rearrange the schedule. Daniel asked, "Will you speak?" Naomi was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "No, I will tell stories. America does not need more speeches. America needs more real stories." The day of the conference, the auditorium was packed politicians, journalists, businessmen, students. When Naomi took the stage, the air was hushed. She had no writing, just a small notebook. 2 weeks ago, she began. A woman was detained at the airport gate because they didn't believe she could sit in the first class. The story was all over the place, but I don't want to talk about it today. I want to talk about what happened next. She told of a young employee named Ethan Carter, who sent her a 7-page email saying he was enrolling in behavioral psychology to better understand unconscious bias. She told of Linda Parker, who volunteered to organize an internal discussion group at JFK to talk about respect and fairness. She told of the thousands of messages from strangers who said they had changed their views after watching the video. Naomi looked up, her voice low and slow. "I realized that what mattered was not who was right or wrong at Gate A22 that day. What mattered was how we chose to respond afterward. And if there is a lesson for America, It is this sometimes. Change doesn't require a loud voice. It just requires one person to stand still and speak the truth. The audience stood up and applauded. Many were in tears. The camera caught Naomi standing on stage, her figure calm, her eyes shining. Not the glow of a hero, but the glow of truth spoken at the right time. After the conference, Naomi was invited into a private room to meet the president. He was calm, with silver hair and sincere eyes. He shook her hand and said, "Thank you, Dr. Ellis. You reminded us that America is strongest when it listens to itself." Naomi replied, "I just did what anyone should do." He smiled. Sometimes the simplest things are the hardest. That evening, Naomi returned to her hotel and opened her laptop. Her inbox was flooded with messages from all over the world. A teacher in South Africa wrote that she had shown Naomi's video to her students in a human rights class. A pilot in Japan thanked her for making me rethink how I greet passengers. Naomi read each line, feeling her heart warm. Daniel knocked on the door, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You know, I got a call from Ethan today," he said. He said he was leading the first course of the Gate A22 program at JFK. He said no one looked at passengers with suspicion anymore. Naomi smiled, looking out the window at the bright city of Washington. That's good. Maybe that flight never took off on time, but it took us further than we could have imagined. They both sat in silence, enjoying their tea. Outside, the sound of cars echoed in the distance, and a gentle wind blew through the tall buildings. Naomi opened her notebook and wrote another line. Real change comes not from power, but from courage. As she put down her pen, the streetlights reflected on her face, both strong and peaceful. She knew her life would never be the same again, but that did not scare her. On the contrary, it made her feel relieved, because she had finally found a way to turn her personal pain into strength for the community. In New York, Ethan Carter wrote on the company's intranet, "I used to be the one who hurt customers, but thanks to Dr. Ellis, I learned that service is not just a job, but a responsibility to the heart." The post was shared thousands of times within the company. Linda Parker sent Naomi a photo of JFK staff taking the Gate A22 course. They were all smiling, holding up small signs, "We choose respect." That night, Naomi received a call from her mother. Her voice was soft on the phone. "Son, your father would be so proud if he were alive to see this." Naomi was silent, tears falling. "I only do what he taught me. Mother, never let silence mean acceptance." When the call ended, she stepped out onto the balcony and looked up at the night sky. A plane was taking off, its red lights fading. She whispered to herself, "Fly away, but don't forget where you came from." And somewhere in the hearts of millions, the story of the woman who was kicked out of the gate and grounded the entire flight continues to fly not with power, but with faith. 3 months later, Naomi Ellis was back in New York. The autumn sky was a bright blue, and a gentle breeze blew through the golden trees. She had just finished a business trip to Washington, where the Gate A22 program had been recognized as a national model for improving the passenger experience. But this trip was more personal. For the first time since that fateful day, she was returning to JFK Airport, the airport where it all began. The car stopped in front of the gate. Naomi stood still for a few seconds, looking up at the giant glass building reflecting the sunlight. Everything was familiar. The bright electronic boards, the steady call of the flight announcements, the smell of coffee from the counter near Gate A22. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. Daniel Price followed, silently carrying her briefcase. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" he asked. Naomi smiled. "Yes. There are roads you have to walk yourself to understand why you fell." She walked slowly down the corridor, her eyes lingering on every corner. As she approached Gate A22, her heart slowed. A group of employees were gathered there, seemingly having a practical training session. A woman turned around, and Naomi recognized Linda Parker. They looked at each other for a few seconds. Then Linda smiled and walked over. "I was hoping you would come back here someday." Naomi replied, "I think the place where the mistake started is where it should end." Linda led her into the training area. On the big screen were the words, "Gate A22 Training. Respect is the new altitude." A group of new employees sat listening intently. Among them was a young face Naomi recognized immediately, Ethan Carter. He stood up when he saw her, his face lighting up. "Dr. Ellis, we're talking about you." The class laughed, the atmosphere lightening. Naomi smiled. "I hope I have something good to say," Ethan replied. "More than anything, you're the reason I'm here." Linda introduced herself to the group. "This is the person who made this program possible." The class applauded. Naomi stepped forward, carrying no materials or lecture notes. She simply stood in the middle of the room, her voice soft. "I didn't come to teach. I just wanted to share. 3 months ago, I stood here feeling like I didn't belong. Today, I stand here, and we're changing that together. It shows that no one is powerless against the system. If they dare to start." The room was silent. A young staff member raised her hand and asked, "Dr. Ellis, what kept you from getting angry that day?" Naomi thought for a moment and then replied, "I did get angry, but then I realized if I let my anger guide me, I'm only part of the problem. If I stay calm, I can be part of the solution." When the talk ended, Ethan invited Naomi for a walk around the airport. They walked down the hallways, where the light reflected off the shiny tiles. Ethan said that since the program began, there had been no reported incidents of discrimination. But the best thing, he said, was that we employees started to look at each other differently. We listened to each other more, and we stopped being divided into management and employee camps. Naomi smiled. That's when the organization really lived, not just functioned. As they passed the coffee counter, Naomi stopped. Behind the counter, a young waitress turned around, her eyes slightly confused, then brightened. "Dr. Ellis, I didn't expect to see you here." Naomi was surprised. "Do we know each other?" The girl nodded, her face red. "I'm Maya, the intern at the company that day. I was standing near Gate A22 when it all happened. I was scared that day, but after seeing how you handled it, I decided to stay in this profession." Naomi gently touched the girl's hand. "I'm glad you chose to stay, because real change needs people like you." Ethan stood beside them, looking at them with a peaceful smile. He whispered, "You know, we now call this gate Gate Hope." Naomi smiled, her voice soft but warm. "Hope is the flight that never lands." In the afternoon, Naomi left the airport, but instead of going straight to her car, she stopped at the small park across the street, which overlooked the JFK greenhouse. Daniel was waiting, holding a magazine. "You should see this." He opened it to the middle page. It was an article from the Harvard Business Review, "The Gate That Changed Corporate America." How Naomi Ellis turned discrimination into leadership. Naomi read a few lines, then gently folded it. Daniel, I don't want to be remembered for a gate. I want to be remembered for how we opened it. They both sat down in their seats, silent for a while. The planes took off one by one, the rumble of the sound no longer making Naomi feel heavy. Daniel asked, "Have you ever thought that if you had just stayed silent and boarded the flight that day, life would have been different?" Naomi looked far away. "Yes, but then, maybe I would have slept well. Just the world around me would have been a little worse. I don't want my peace to be exchanged for silence." The afternoon gradually fell. The sunlight spread across the runway. Naomi stood up, looking towards Gate A22 one last time. In that moment, she felt strangely at peace. No more resentment, no more self-defense, only gratitude, because the mistakes had become the seeds of something good. On her way to the car, she received a text message from Rachel Myers, the flight attendant who had met her on the fateful flight. "Dr. Ellis, I wanted to let you know we just finished our first flight crew training. I told you your story. One of the pilots said he was proud to work for an airline like you." Naomi read it, smiling slightly. "Thank you, Rachel," she texted back. "But stop telling my story. Tell yours." As the car pulled away from the airport, Naomi looked out the window at the red sunset sky. A plane was taking off, its lights flashing through the clouds. She thought to herself, perhaps no one really grounds a flight, stops a flight from taking off unless they want the world to learn how to fly right. And sometimes, to do that, someone has to dare to stand in the middle of a crowded airport, just to say, "We can do better than this." Outside, the city lights come on, but inside Naomi, another journey begins, a journey of healing, not just for her, but for everyone who has ever been forced to prove their worth because they are different. A year after that fateful day, the skies of America seem bluer. Planes still take off every day, still fly over familiar cities, but for many people, what has changed is not the distance, but the way they look at each other. Naomi Ellis's story has become part of popular culture. At airports, people talk about the Gate A22 effect as a way of talking about something that softens the human heart. That morning, Naomi stood on the second-floor balcony of Atlantic Skyway's headquarters in Atlanta. She watched young employees enter and exit the building in new uniforms, embroidered in small letters on the sleeves, "Fly with respect." Inside, the conference room was preparing for the program's one-year anniversary. Daniel Price walked over and handed her a stack of reports. "You'll like this," he said. "Since implementing Gate A22, passenger satisfaction has increased 35%, and complaints have dropped by nearly 50%. But the best part is that the number of employees quitting due to stress has dropped dramatically." Naomi read a few lines and nodded. Because when people are treated like people, they stay. The ceremony began in the grand ballroom. The screens played back moments from the year Naomi speaking in Washington, training at JFK, groups of staff smiling under a "We Choose Respect" sign. When the old video came up, Naomi being asked to leave the boarding line, then emerging 15 minutes later with her manager to ground the flight. The hall fell silent. She looked up, her face calm. No more pain, just a meaningful silence. After the ceremony, Mark Evans, who had started the project with her, approached. "Naomi, there's something I want you to know," he said. "Last week, I was in Dallas on business. I was in line at Gate B19 and saw a black passenger whose ticket was checked. But this time, instead of being suspicious, The agent just smiled and said, "We just want to make sure you have the best seat." The woman smiled back. She said, "Thank you. I feel better." Mark paused, his voice dropping, and I thought maybe that's how the world starts to get better. Naomi chuckled, one by one. That evening, she was invited to a virtual panel discussion with business leaders on kindness in a multiracial age. The host asked, "Dr. Ellis, if you could say one thing to America today, what would it be?" Naomi paused, her eyes looking away. "I would say that justice doesn't begin with laws. It begins with listening. And sometimes, if we listen long enough, the world will learn to fix itself." After the talk, she turned off the screen and sat in the quiet room. Outside, the city was bathed in lights. She opened the old notebook, the one that had accompanied her all along the way. Between the pages were countless lines of writing. But at the end, she only wrote one sentence. "No flight takes off if the heart is still anchored to the ground." A week later, Naomi received an invitation from her old college in Chicago, where she had studied economics before entering the corporate world. They wanted her to return, not to receive an honorary degree, but to speak to freshmen about leading with humanity. When she walked onto the stage, the entire room rose to applaud. She looked down at the front row and saw eager, young faces. "I used to sit right where you were," she said. "I used to think success meant climbing high, but now I understand. It's important to reach down and pull others up with you." "What was the hardest part of that journey for you?" asked a student. Naomi replied, "It wasn't facing other people. It was facing yourself, your fear, your vulnerability, your ego. Once you get past that, the world outside isn't as scary anymore." When the talk ended, a white student approached and shook her hand. "Thank you. I think I learned something else sometimes. Silence is complicity." Naomi nodded, and speaking out, even when you're afraid, is an act of courage. On the flight back to Atlanta that evening, Naomi sat by the window, watching the city lights fade below. A flight attendant walked by, recognized her, and smiled. "Dr. Ellis, I just wanted to say thank you because of your story. I learned to serve with my heart." Naomi replied, "Thank you. Just remember, every passenger has a story we don't know." She turned back to look out, where the stars stretched out. In that moment, she felt clearly the world was truly changing. Not loudly, not ostentatiously, but through small actions, repeated every day. When the plane landed, she left the airport and headed straight to the city center. In the small square where she often stopped whenever she wanted to be quiet, they had erected a bronze statue, not big, not fancy. Just a woman standing in the middle of the airport, holding a plane ticket, looking up. At the foot of the statue was engraved the words, "To those who choose calm over chaos." For those who choose calm over chaos. Naomi stood in front of the statue, silent for a long time. She didn't know who had erected it, but in her heart, she felt one thing clearly: the story was no longer hers alone. Daniel walked over, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "I figured you'd want to see this first," he said. "The city decided to put this statue up to honor those who have had the courage to speak up for decency." Naomi smiled, taking the coffee. "Nice, but I hope they don't put up another statue of me anywhere. I'd rather be alive." Daniel smiled. "You don't need a statue. Naomi, you're the story." She looked around and saw a group of high school students stopping to read the inscription at the foot of the statue. One boy asked his friend, "Do you know who she is?" The girl replied, "I don't know, but I heard she was the one who stopped a plane so the world could start on the right track." Naomi listened and chuckled. That sentence, simple and more beautiful than any title. Late at night, when she returned home, she sat on the chair, watching the streetlights reflected through the window. She turned on the radio, soft jazz playing. In that moment, she felt strangely peaceful. She knew the journey was not over. There was still much to do, many people to be heard, to be seen. But for the first time in a tumultuous year, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, to know that all her efforts had not been in vain. And in that quiet light, Naomi Ellis smiled and whispered, "Maybe, sometimes, to change the world, we just need to start by believing that people can still be good." Outside, another flight took off. No one knew where it was going. But, perhaps, from that day on, every flight carried something new. The belief that if just one person dared to stand up, the whole sky could change. Dr. Naomi Ellis. Story is more than just an airport incident. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes change begins in the smallest of moments. When she was treated unfairly, she chose not anger or silence, but calmness and dignity. It was her response that turned her personal trauma into a voice for millions. The lesson here is not just for young people, but also for older generations, those who have witnessed injustice and chosen to remain silent to maintain peace. Naomi shows that you don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes, just keeping calm, speaking with sincerity and kindness, can change the whole room. In life, we will encounter situations where justice is not on our side. But instead of reacting with hatred, choose the Naomi way, turning hurt into a lesson, turning rejection into an opportunity to remind the world of kindness. Thank you for watching and listening to this story. If you believe that kindness can change the world, please like, share, and subscribe to spread more heart-touching stories like this. Because every share you make is a way to make the world a kinder place.